The new right that had now emerged in large part because of the religious movement and revival, if you will, wasn't really anything new. In prior videos, especially in and around those that I've discussed about Lyndon Johnson, the 1964 presidential election had reshaped the path of the Republican Party. Barry Goldwater was seen as being a very conservative and almost extremist, controversial figure. And his failure in the 1964 presidential election enabled others who had similar beliefs to come to the forefront. See, at this time, um, people were seeking a difference. They were seeking a change. They wanted a return to traditional values. They wanted less government bureaucracy. They wanted lower taxes. They wanted more economic freedoms, less government intervention. That was all great, but you need evangelicals to kind of complete the conservative movement. Those who want to return to traditional powers, those who want to return to, instead of moral relativity, they want traditional moral values, Christian moral values, more of a Christian influence in daily society. The combination of those two factors, that social control, social conservatism, not control, but social conservatism in combination with economic freedoms, became hallmarks of right wing politics. The modern conservative movement is largely centered around those two, especially the economic aspect of it. So, in the 1970s, even though they didn't have as much of the power, conservative commentators and conservative movements would gain power through direct mail, radio shows, televangelist TV shows like Pat Robertson used to have one. Rush Limbaugh gained fame in the 1990s. It was especially popular in the early to mid 90s. You would attract many different conservatives from all over the country, especially now that they were dispersed all throughout the South and Southwest. So, what you see there is a new right conservative movement that's pro God, pro guns, and low taxes. Okay? That would be a hallmark for a revival and emergence of the new conservative right. And 1964, Ronald Reagan, a Hollywood actor, had supported Barry Goldwater. And after Goldwater got smoked in that election, Ronald Reagan kind of took it upon himself to get involved in conservative politics. And he would espouse enough political momentum to run for election for governor of California by 1966. So, Ronald Reagan, former actor, becomes governor of California. And he's popular. He's very popular. And he's a conservative. Okay? So, that was one of the things that got this political movement stirred. Barry Goldwater kind of opened the idea. Ronald Reagan took that idea and he sprinted with it. And then, of course, in the 1970s, Gerald Ford had become president, and his vice president, um, Nelson Rockefeller, was far more of like a moderate to even liberal Republican. And for this growing conservative movement, that was not a good thing. And President Ford, who had been unpopular because he pardoned Nixon, also had an unpopular vice president. And President Ford resisted amnesty for draft dodgers from the Vietnam era. He presided over the fall of Vietnam. Um, he supported Nixon and Kissinger's détente movements in combination with the Soviet Union. Those were unpopular with conservatives. So Ronald Reagan runs against him in the Republican primary in 76. And to win the nomination, Gerald Ford removes Nelson Rockefeller from his ticket and he puts on there Bob Dole, okay, that Kansas senator that we loved for a while, rest him. Otherwise, though, Bob Dole being more of a steadfast conservative, he's going to appeal to those who are seeking it. Okay, so you're going to have a platform that's more pro conservative now with that. Okay, so from that standpoint, other things are also going on. In California itself, you had Proposition 13, which in 1978 got its political beginnings as a result of people being angry by skyrocketing property tax rates. Now, nobody really is crazy about paying taxes. Okay? I'm not crazy about it. I see why they're enacted, I see a use for them, but I believe too much taxation could potentially be a form of tyranny. Okay? Who's to say how much is the right amount to tax? You do need to fund everyday programs like your fire, your first responders, policemen. You need to have paved roads, things along those lines. Taxes serve a purpose. Okay? Too much taxation rather, can be stifling. So there were people who believed in these ideas, and they believed in the idea of maybe putting on the ballot to roll back some property taxes. They're going to reduce some of the property taxes in the state of California by way of Proposition 13. Now, just like in Texas, property taxes in California went to fund public schools there. And Proposition 13 won, and some of the public schools in California began to see a deterioration. So the movement around taxes became less about property taxes and more broad based about taxes overall. More of an awareness rather about just where all taxes would go. Where are the tax revenues being spent? Income taxes, sales tax, not just property tax, capital gains tax. Where are government raised taxes going? Are they perhaps being wasted? Because if they are, then they need to be drastically reduced because, hey, we don't want our economy to grow weaker while we're spending more and paying more and more in taxes. We want something for what we pay or not pay them at all. That was a growing movement in and around the tax revolt in the late 1970s, centered around the Prop 13 idea in California. Okay? And these tax revolts would kind of spread in popularity, not just in California, but all over the country. And they would be taken by more of your political conservatives to espouse the idea of lower taxation. You see a common internet meme today in the late teens in 2020, really centered around the Libertarian Party, which really espouses free economy. Not just no taxation without representation. That was from our revolutionary era. Their idea is that taxation is theft. Taxation's theft. Okay? So the idea that the government being able to force taxes upon you is reaching directly into your pocket, and if you don't pay them, you're going to go to jail. So therefore, taxation is theft. Okay? That's a little bit much for me. I kind of understand the ideology though, okay? And if you have lower taxes, people are going to be spending more of their money and pumping it into the economy. So I can see where there's going to be a significant economic factor in positive to reduce taxes. I get it. But how much is how much, and how much do you want anarchy almost? It almost seems that way. Otherwise, though, resentment in growing tax rates begins to rise as well. Okay, so there's a tax revolution. Harping upon this in the 1980 presidential election was that guy Ronald Reagan again. Okay, he served a couple terms as governor of California. He ran in the 1976 election against Gerald Ford, narrowly lost, and he seized upon it to truly gain 4 more years of momentum, especially in an era where Jimmy Carter's only success were the Camp David Accords. Jimmy Carter struggled at almost everything else. The economy, which was very important to conservatives, was struggling. mightily. So, you also have the crisis in Iran with the Iranian Revolution, the hostages taken, the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, more and more nuclear missiles being placed all across the world. Um, Jimmy Carter wasn't real popular within his own party. Ronald Reagan was very popular with his party. So, Republicans rallied enthusiastically behind Ronald Reagan in the 1980 presidential election. And only a few years ago, he had almost stole the nomination from Gerald Ford. He's a really popular guy. And he really espouses the combination between the religious right and the conservative economics movements that wanted to make America the powerhouse across the world, that also wanted to reduce taxes and reduce government oversight, all while returning America to more traditional value mindset. Okay. He pledged to restore America to being the world's greatest economic power and to also have the world's greatest military power. He's going to retap our military, and he's going to do something about America's frustration with a struggling economy. He's going to do something about American citizens in Iran being held hostage. Ronald Reagan pledged to restore faith in the overall American system, American economy, American might, American international prestige that we lost after Vietnam, America's economic freedoms, America's return to tradition. Ronald Reagan espoused all of those things. And in the election of 1980, it was a foregone conclusion. Ronald Reagan was going to destroy. And he did. Okay? Ronald Reagan won over 50% of all the popular vote, despite there being almost 6 million votes for an independent. He soundly defeated Jimmy Carter, so much so that he earned 489 electoral votes to Carter's 49. That is a sweeping landslide. That's bigger than LBJ over Goldwater in 64. Okay? Hold that thought, because another election happens 4 years later, and Ronald Reagan does pretty well in that one too. We'll talk about that later. Okay? Otherwise, though, the only states that Carter wins are Minnesota, West Virginia, Maryland, and his home state of Georgia. Congratulations. You got your hiney kicked pretty bad. When interest rates are at 20%, you're not going to be popular. Okay? On the day Reagan was inaugurated, Iran released the 53 hostages that were held for over a year. That kind of ushered in very quickly the Ronald Reagan era in American politics, the new right.